So I'm going to first of all welcome the panelists today. We're going to be talking about how the COVID situation has impacted shipping and what are the short, medium and long-term implications. And really, you know, the world is slowly starting to emerge from the effects of the pandemic. But the ripple effects of this once in a generation occurrence are just starting to really be felt, whether it's sort of rising costs, overstretched global supply chains, or congested ports. Shipping is part of the problem and also the solution. So really, we really want to be touching on a number of issues in the debate today to see what the, as I said, the short, medium and long-term implications are. It's interesting to see shipping hitting the national headlines as it has done, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure in other countries around the world. This tremendous industry that we all work in and embrace, that brings 90% of trade to everybody in the world. And if we didn't have shipping, half the world would freeze and half the world would starve. When there's an element of disrupting that, you know, suddenly it's of interest. So that's really quite interesting. So thank you very much indeed. If I can just introduce the panelists today. We've got a stellar lineup. We have Matthew Attard. He's a shipping lawyer at Ganado Advocates, and with a particular focus on shipping registration, vessel sale and acquisition, and the formation and support of shipping organisations and companies. Matthew regularly assists major financial institutions and owners in the financing of vessels and related matters, as well as on corporate issues of matters and M&A transactions. Matthew is also the Vice President of the Malta Maritime Law Association. So Matthew, welcome to the debate today. We also have Klaus Dimigan. Klaus is a corporate and maritime lawyer. He holds bar admissions in Germany, Hamburg, and in the Marshall Islands, and is a partner in the law firm Ullman Rindfleisch Gadau. I have totally mispronounced that. I do apologise. Since 2001. He mainly works for local German as well as international ship-owning companies and ship finance institutions, such as banks, private equity funds and other investors in relation to shipbuilding, ship sale and purchase, financing models and corporate restructuring and structuring. And obviously based in Hamburg with all the German ship owners there, I'm sure you're kept very, very busy. We also have and welcome Rona Caspi, and Rona works at the Yerlikaya Law Office, a law office specialised in maritime law, while he's educating at Istanbul University Faculty of Law. He represents the Republic of the Marshall Islands in Turkey as special agent, and he mainly deals with banking, financing and securitizations, project financing, sale and purchase of all types of seago vehicles, as well as international dispute resolution and international arbitration, maritime law, sea commercial law. Rona, you are very busy. He's also a member of the Istanbul Bar Association and is fluent in Turkish and English. We also have Enrico Vigani, Benelli Herrera's partner. Enrico is expert in maritime law, project financing related to shipping, transport and infrastructure, including planning of complex financial transactions, litigation and international arbitration, shipbuilding and ship conversion. He's a team leader of the Shipping and Transport Focus Team, and he is a member of the International Arbitration Focus Team and members of the COVID-19 Task Force. So, folks, welcome to the debate today. As we normally do, I'm going to allow the panelists to relax into the debate today, and just to take a couple of minutes of your time, 4 or 5 minutes or so, just to really give us your position on this whole issue of COVID and how it has impacted shipping. But you know, we all now want to look forward. We want to look at the short, medium, and long-term implications. So just really, as in the way that I introduced you, or Matthew, can I ask you to take the floor? If you can stick to the 4 to 5 minutes, and then we can then open up the debate. But over to you, sir.
Thanks, Sean. No, I won't take much of your time. You rightly pointed out that the COVID issues have brought about something positive for people working in the shipping industry, in that there's finally a realization by most people as to the importance of shipping for the transportation of goods and how essential this industry is for the global stability in that respect. I'll try and argue, not argue really, give a bit of a presentation as to the Maltese experience and how we here in Malta were affected in the shipping industry by COVID. Being a lawyer working within this field and representing a number of owners, one of the biggest challenges faced by our owners, our clients, were the necessity to request dispensations. Dispensations from, certain regular standards that are imposed upon Maltese vessels. In short, when an owner requires a derogation from expected standards, they need to approach the administration for green lighting. And most of these permissions are granted on the basis of, it being an unforeseen circumstance. And in addition to that, the owner giving a necessary comfort to the administration as to how they're going to remedy it quickly. With COVID, I can report that the administration in Malta was well aware what was coming its way. And as early as February of 2020, started itself making representations at IMO level and with other jurisdictions to see how they would react to laxing certain rules expected from the industry. The issues we've faced, as I think you, and before entering into the issues, we saw that a lot of dispensations were given in a timely manner, and I think there was a lot of sensitivity shown by our administration, but even by others, as to the plight the owners were facing. The problem we faced were the seafarers. I mean, seafarers, as you know, the disembarkation and embarkation of seafarers came with a lot of challenges. I know that the ILO has been very vociferous about this point and has tried to claim or try to give the status of an essential worker to the seafarers, because without them ships can't operate and you can't get your goods. The flip side is what we see anyhow, is that any administration giving certain dispensations for extensions of crew contracts is so very rarely, because the longer crew members remain on board vessels, you have higher fatigue, stress, meltdowns, which ultimately lead to unsafe vessels. But obviously, when faced with certain requests and certain impossibilities placed upon owners, the administration had no other choice. Which leads us to the jurisdictional interpretations with issues such as these. A few years ago, we were involved in negotiating armed guards on board Maltese vessels. Now, this at the time was a controversial topic because the IMO and the international community linked having armed guards on board vessels with the potential of leading to an escalation of violence. To cut a long story short, since we don't have much time, we managed to get dispensations for this, but quickly realized that the problem started there. You had owners waving around dispensations given by the Maltese administration, entering ports which either did not recognize that or which had their own interpretations as to how armed guards should be placed on boards. I'm linking this to certain dispensations given throughout the COVID period, in particular, the extensions of crew contracts and certain dispensations for dry docking. We've had instances with, in particular, Australian ports where the Australian administration, which is the whole sovereign right to do so, raised their eyebrows as to certain dispensations being given. So that is a bit of a negative. On the positive part, I can report quite, happily that in most parts, our business continued as usual. We continued assisting with new registrations. sales and purchases, and recording of financing. And all this was only possible because the industry came together with the regulator, and in turn the regulator came together with other jurisdictions and came to conclusions or came to modus operandi which allowed us to work in a business as usual environment. So that was certainly a positive trait of shipping. For future, and I'll conclude on this, I think that digitization of certification and better communication between administrations is critical. And in addition, I also believe that we need to continue backing organizations such as the IMO and these international bodies to create a uniform approach to shipping. We need to maintain standards, but we cannot have national interests override the international good which shipping provides.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I mean, I'm just going to ask you one small question before I come on to Klaus to get his perspective. I mean, you talk about the IMO and the continue to look to the IMO for change here and what have you. During the COVID situation, this is something I want the debate to focus in on as well later on. There's been a lot of criticism levied at the national administrations, the flags, for not upholding their side of the MLC. The MLC is a three-legged stool, which is seafarers, ship owners, ship managers, and then flags. They're the ones who are shutting their borders. They're the ones who aren't allowing seafarers off. Just as a sort of very, very quick response, but what is your view on that? Because we will take it up later on in the debate. What's your view?
I mean, the administration wants to uphold the terms of the MLC. In all fairness, I don't think personally that the breach of any MLC rules was instigated by flag administrations. I think the issues were instigated by national interests, so including Malta. I mean, we had lockdowns. I faced difficulties with crew disembarkation myself in Malta, both for commercial vessels and super yachts. And I don't think it was a shortcoming from Transport Malta, but rather, the national approach to closing your borders. Certainly, and I'll close at this, Malta, as with other jurisdictions, takes the MLC very seriously, and our experience with the MLC has been very positive. I mean, so no, I think it's mostly the lack of sensitivity shown by national governments that have led to the administration having to bend over backwards to accommodate reasonable requests.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I was actually thinking to report on the German situation regarding the support, the government support for the economy during the COVID times, or from the beginning of the COVID times. And that is quite substantial in total. I mean, if you look at the entire economy, the Ministry of Commerce in Berlin actually published breathtaking numbers, which I was not aware of. So they have actually provided Corona help in cash, or they were planning to provide Corona help in cash for 353 billion euros and plus 819 billion euros of state guarantee, which is amazing. It's a huge amount, and it has actually doubled the national budget. But all these state aids don't really concern shipping so much. Shipping is a very small fraction of the German economy, and what we are looking at, if we look at the state aids for shipping in Germany, is actually the KfW loans. There's a special Corona program from KfW, and that is not only for shipping, it's also for other fractions of the German economy. They have disbursed 49 billion euros until today. And from those 49 billion euros, actually loans to shipping companies were 25 million. So that's a very, very small part of this. It actually went into shipping companies, and a bigger part of 444 million euros to the German shipbuilding industry. So we are really talking about a very small fraction from the whole state aid. And it may be interesting for you to learn how it works. The shipping companies can apply for these KfW loans, and they have to do it via their bank. So they make the application to their house bank. So if they are a Deutsche Bank or whatever, they make the application there. And Deutsche Bank then gets a guarantee from KfW with the effect that KfW takes over between 80 and 100% of that risk. So that's basically how it's done. But the house bank, so the bank of the ship owning company, has to do the risk assessment for KfW and is liable for a correct risk assessment towards KfW. And that is a bit of a downside for the house bank, because they enter into a further liability, which maybe they don't want to. The loan is secured by junior security. And one thing which is really difficult for shipping companies in Germany is that you have to prove that the company was financially sound on 31st December 2019. So they don't give loans to companies which were already bankrupt before Corona. That's the simple idea. And then the terms are basically up to 10 years. First 2 years repayment free, so no principal repayment in the first 2 years. Thereafter, you have to repay quarterly, fixed interest rate around 2%, and during the currency of the loan, no dividend payment. So that's basically these are the terms of these loans. And the problem actually is that these loans are still loans, and they have to be repaid. So the shipping companies have their normal shipping loans, which are continuing actually, plus new liabilities under this KfW loan, which they also have to repay, which makes it difficult in the future. The bank of the shipping company has additional liabilities because they have to do the risk assessment for KfW and are liable. And they have to take a small portion of the loan in their own books, which some of the banks don't want to. So I mean, you all know that there are shipping banks in Germany who really want to close their shipping portfolio altogether. So they are not suitable for this program. And what we have seen when we have done a couple of these cases for KfW, and what we have seen is actually that it is far from fast and far from unbureaucratic. It is very expensive in terms of expert opinions, legal work, back and forth. The risk assessment, they are all very careful, and I mean, normally you spend a good 6-digit amount in euros on legal costs, advisors, expert opinions, stuff like that, and it really takes time. That's so it's not a very practical program, and I wouldn't actually say that it is a huge success in the shipping industry. So the shipping industry is, I don't know, it's not a very good program, and the impact of, I mean, that's basically the support, the government support for shipping. That's what I wanted to report on that. And the other thing which is actually connected to it is the COVID effect on the German ship financing community, which is that, for example, that there are a couple of branches in the shipping industry which really suffered. So obviously cruise industry, well, that was a disaster. And we have seen that a lot of product tanker companies actually suffered, because it was just nobody was using aircrafts anymore, and everybody stayed at home, and so there was no need to transport kerosene from A to B. So that was a big problem. So some parts of the industry were really affected. And the reaction of the ship financing community in Germany is actually that they step back and try to get rid of these high-risk engagements instead of helping. That's they really want to get rid of it. And cruise ships are, well, I wouldn't say impossible, but really hard to finance in Germany right now, probably worldwide, because the banks just see the risk, and you can't really mitigate the risk. If there's another COVID lockdown, the cruise industry will be affected once again, and that's something which the banks really have in mind, which means that it would take a long time before they will finance cruise ships in a substantial to a substantial extent again. And they look very carefully into the maintenance of their financial covenants, which is really hard to maintain at present for most of the companies. So that's what we see in Germany. The ship financing is hardly affected by the COVID, by the lockdown and by COVID. Yeah.
All right, Klaus, good. Just before I ask you my supplementary question, I'm just saying to all the panelists also, please, if you want a question as well, stick your hand up. Klaus is saying a good amount of information there as well that you might want to pick up on. I mean, the one thing that strikes me, Klaus, I mean, when you're sitting there in Hamburg, I think you're surrounded in northern Germany with about 600 German container ship owners in that area, aren't there? There's a lot of container ship operators there. Yep. And as we know, the container ship market has gone through the roof. I mean, what impact has that had on us all? Because, surely, even though they are reluctant and sad that they can't provide the service that they want to provide because of port congestion, they are raking it in.
Well, I mean, I'm so happy for all these container owners, for the industry going through the roof, because they have been going through a very, very hard time. I would actually say there were very few bright moments since 2010, and so we can all be very, very happy for the industry to this respect, that the business is going so well, and of course they are not negatively affected by the lockdown, but they are now selling their ships and trying to make cash out of the present market situation. That's the situation on that side. So they don't suffer at all.
I wanted to link that with probably where you were going at, Sean. Financing for these containers. How are the banks? What's the bank's appetite for German owners, helping in acquiring these vessels, or the banks are still reluctant in that respect, Klaus, even with containers?
The German banks in general are reluctant to do ship finance, because the European rules, mandatory rules on providing loans in general are so strict that the risk leads to equity retentions within the bank. So if you grant corporate loans, big corporate chunks, you have a much better equity use instead of doing ship finance, and that is still the case. So the market is not of big interest to the banks right now. There are a couple of them who like to do the financing because interest rates are very attractive, but these are very small institutions, and I would say really exceptions to the rule that nobody really wants to do ship finance still in Germany.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And I would like to state that, Turkey is one of the most affected countries within the Europe, probably, because also Turkish economy is based on the tourism, which is, as we know, currently for the last 2 years, it's quite a big shock for everyone, the travel bans, restrictions, everything. And therefore, the Turkey is quite have a heavy impact on this disease pandemic situation. On the other hand, the shipping is also affected. Turkey is also within the middle of Black Sea and Aegean and Mediterranean Sea. So we had a quite a small Mediterranean Black Sea transportation and trade business within Turkish ports. And it's also affected based on the fact that the crew changes are not allowed. The crew stayed on board when they signed a contract for 5 months, but they stayed on board more than a year, sometimes year and a half. And it was tough times for Turkey to get into, how to say, not to normal, but to understand what is required to get preventions, restrictions, and the measures to stop the spread of COVID-19, where in some places in the beginning where we didn't know how to understand whether the person is affected by COVID or a normal flu. It was quite a times that the shipyards are full, and there are lots of workers who didn't understand that they have COVID-19, but they were actually affected, and they also spread the disease within the territories which they work in their home. And it was quite an effect in Turkey, but now the vaccination is in everywhere, and also easy to diagnose COVID-19 in the same day, within a couple of hours now. It's been more and more, we are get used to our new normals now. We are used to live with the COVID-19 measures at this time now.
Rona, thank you. I mean, just one thing. I mean, one thing that Turkey is also your big shipyard and building and ship repair there as well. Yeah. What impact? How are they feeling at the moment? What's their situation there as far as not only COVID but the direct as well as indirect implications of COVID? What's the situation regarding them?
Turkey has a good shipyard business, shipbuilding business, as well as ship repair business, both in Tuzla region in Istanbul and the city called Yalova. We have very well shipyards that can build some specific vessels. And actually for the last 5 years, all the shipyards are quite busy with building special boats to Northern Europe, to Norway, to Denmark, to Sweden, those kind of places, where the vessels are powered by alternative power supplies like electricity, like LNG powered vessels, engines. And there was quite a number of vessels were built in those shipyards region. It's quite an impact because in the beginning there was the lockdowns where nobody can go to the work, and the delays cannot be predicted when it's going to be open for the shipyards. Also for the repairs, the people came to Turkey for the repairs, but there was a problem with the supply chain where the equipments, the spare parts cannot be come to the shipyard, cannot be produced by the equipment providers, and there was quite a time of delays in the shipyards, and also quite a number of vessels are waited to get into their line in the repair yards. It was tough times for the docks to get the vessels.
Thank you very much indeed, Rona. Enrico, let me bring you in, and thank you for your patience. I do appreciate it.
No problem at all.
So look, we're waiting with bated breath to get your views and your thoughts on this situation. So over to you, sir.
Right. Thank you very much, Sean, and many thanks to Ship International Management and Ganado for organizing this seminar and giving the opportunity of discussing about the impact of COVID on our business. And I will move from the opening of Matthew's speech, who underlined how important shipping and logistics are, and how this pandemic disease really spotted the light on the importance of logistics, which throughout the situation provide an excellent service and a very flexible approach. And I take this opportunity to pay a tribute also to the Coast Guard and all the administrations which tried and supported this service to the industry and this service to the community in general. I must say that even in the darkest hours, the Italian ports remained open although of course with some restriction. Main one hitting the cruise vessel, whilst, for instance, Dubai port already in February 2020 closed its trade to all the vessels, all kind of vessels, including, of course, cruise vessel. And on that, there's been a very practical approach taken by our administrations, also setting very practical rules in terms of the presence of the workers within the Italian territory. It is, you know, Italy has a very peculiar logistic when the road carriage has a very big importance, and there is a constant access of people in the terminals and in the port. You may imagine we are not, of course, one of the biggest shipping community in the world, but by far we are the first in the management of ro-ro ferries. And ro-ro ferry means, of course, a close contact between the sea and the land, because of course, when you send a big oil carrier at sea, it for 20 days, for 1 month, we can forget about her. But if you have a ro-ro ferry, it does touch the ports at least twice a day. And over the pandemic, this is, of course, a big issue to be sorted out. As I said, some practical rule. One in terms of mobility of people and mobility of business, what I would call a golden rule, the rule of 72 hours, then muting the 120 hours, which was the time someone bringing services to Italy was allowed to stay without any problem and any limitation. That worked very well in providing support to our industry. I would also like to outline something about the main business for Italy, which was the cruise business, of course, either in terms of cruise terminal, which very, very harshly suffered after the pandemic, and of course, cruise liners and shipbuilding. Cruise liners had the problem of having the vessel moving very, very quickly from a very welcome guest to every port to a kind of pariah of the sea, refused by a lot of ports with problems having people on board, especially over the winter cruises in age and with a considerable problem in terms of health. On that, I really share the view of Matthew that despite shipping is a very, very international community, national approaches render lives very, very difficult. And the general approach of countries was not really in terms of reciprocal cooperation. You may imagine, you may remember, over July 2020, even in the European Union, it was approved the so-called green list, which would have been intended to make movement and travel between the European Union easier and above all certain. Yet in September, with the famous second wave, every country started setting out their own rules, and this dream of certainty in the movements of people became absolutely collapsed and was definitely over. That was a big problem, which was also in terms of the disembarkation of the crew, because the shipping community, IMO, reacted very, very promptly. DINCO, they approved a crew disembarkation clause, which, however, remained on the paper because even if agreed between the parties, could not be enforced because there were a lot of problems by part of coastal states. You may remember the war, the commercial war between China and Australia, and all the bulk carriers just awaiting to discharge or awaiting to have their crew disembarked in the north of China. But to end up and to move to the debate, which I think would be the most interesting moment of this morning, I also would like to point out how the shipping community was very, very reactive and resilient and flexible. For instance, in terms of class certificate and generally ship certificate, digitalization worked very well and properly. And ARENA, the Italian Classification Society, a member of IACS, the International Association of Classification Society, developed a program for renewal of class and renewal of visits through even drone system and digital approaches, which of course helped a lot in keeping vessels in class and keeping the safety high also in the course of the pandemic. While I say final remark, which so far has not been developed too much, force majeure, and of course force majeure was a subject for a number of countries, including also very big shipbuilding project. And again, there's been a very peculiar national approach. Maybe some of you remember the force majeure certificate issued by the China Council for the Promotion of International Trade at the very beginning of the pandemic. And of course, Western European ship owners, including Italian ship owners, were laughing at this way of escaping from liability, saying that, of course, force majeure need to be proven case by case. Yet, when the pandemic hit Italy, our chambers of commerce were very prone and very prepared to issue force majeure certificate, which most likely do not worth the piece of paper on which they have been drafted. But anyway, I think now it is time to go to the debate. And again, thank you very much for your attention. It has been a pleasure.
I mean, just going now on to the debate, and you talked there, and we have been talking about the impact on the crew. Michael Nordal has sent in a point here saying that they mustn't be forgotten that the seafarer centres around the world have been a lifeline for ships' crews unable to repatriate, giving support. And also with regards to COVID-19 vaccinations, and that's a valid point. But I want to come on to this whole issue of the responsibilities of the national administrations, and the question of the debate here is not only how has COVID impacted shipping, we've had a number of instances today, but what are the implications? And I think really this is a key element moving forward. When you look at, the role that they have played in the last 2 years, and you talk about force majeure, Enrico, as well, and certainly as far as shipbuilding contracts are concerned and what have you, what should the industry be keeping an eye out for in the short, medium term moving forward as a repercussion of COVID? Because there's already press going on about big swathes of crew members wanting to resign, not wanting to go back to sea, the way they were treated, etc. What's the panel's view on the implications? And let's get to the nub on that. Who wants to answer that? Enrico, do you want to have a little stab at that first, and then I'm going to bring in Matthew, Klaus, and Rhoda on this. But Enrico, what's your view?
Right. Thank you very much. So the implications of COVID, or better, I would say more widely, the implication of the big changes which impacted over the shipping business for over the last 2 years. And I think that one is, in my view, environmental transition. Logistics now, of course, has become a core subject, a core argument, and being a core argument, general concepts such as sustainability, environment, zero net will necessarily apply to our industry. I know that someone will be, ship owners especially, will be very concerned, if not irritated, by this new challenge, because they say, well, did not we had enough with COVID? Now another challenge. Now we have to jump even higher after this very hard challenge. However, this is one of the development. I am sure Klaus talk about the financial program, and I think that for financial program of any government, at least this is in Italy with our national plan of resilience and restart, do not or cannot avoid the environmental issue. So this is one, and I think it will be a leading approach and a leading theme in all the future years.
Yeah.
Not only because it's a governmental request, but also because it's a request of the big customers. We all know there's been a recent article on the Financial Times that Amazon, IKEA, and Unilever are seeking for zero impact carrier, which definitely means something. And so this, in my view, will be the next challenge for.
Well, I mean, when it comes to long-term implications, we have been talking about force majeure already. And I'm sure that all of us have seen cases, well, in spring, early summer last year, where especially Chinese shipyards have actually claimed force majeure because they wanted to get more time to finish the ship. So there was some sort of pretended force majeure cases. And when that has been solved, we will probably see less force majeure on COVID for COVID reasons, because I mean every force majeure has an element of unforeseeability, and we have lived with COVID now for 1.5 years basically with lockdowns, so nobody can actually say that the next lockdown is unforeseeable because we know that this can happen. You know, it is. I think that force majeure, due to COVID reasons, will definitely go down in this respect. And the other thing, which I just wanted to address, as we have this remote webinar here, is actually that we shift our activities as maritime lawyers from traveling from A to B, being or attending a closing in person. We shifted to remote closings and to remote video meetings, and I think that is good from an environmentally sustainability standpoint, as Enrico said. So we are not traveling. We don't use air travel, but we stay at home and use our bicycles instead. But sometimes I really fail to understand how it shall actually work. So, for example, what Enrico said about the RENA concept, that they do digital, or that they digitalize inspections. So they find ways to do inspections on a remote basis. I just wonder how a class inspector can actually evaluate the condition of a ship without being on board. So that is really something which I fail. Well, I lack the fantasy. I mean, maybe renewable of certificates may be possible in some instances, but really inspecting a ship without being on board is something which sounds really strange to me. And the other thing is, if you are in a sale and purchase closing in the delivery of a ship, we have developed techniques over the decades, like tabling documents, waiting for the money, staying together until the mortgage is discharged, and things like that. And all this is gone now, because we are sitting in front of a screen, and then you show a bill of sale, and the other says, "Oh yeah, that's a bill of sale," and then I can pay. But nobody knows whether you will ever get the bill of sale. You know, it has changed so much, and I think this remote video thing will probably go away again. So we will probably see that it's necessary to meet in person instead of sitting in front of a screen. So that's.
Let me bring in Matthew Roan on that, because, you know, speaking from my own side, I've got itchy feet. I can't wait to travel again. You know, I mean, we're all the same. But whether we're going to have to reach a happy medium. But Matthew, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, on the two issues there, on, you know, being less force majeure, but also on shipping getting back to normal. What are your thoughts?
I think Klaus makes some valid points. We're all looking to meet physically and start interacting as normal. Having said that, I do believe that the digital platform has a lot of value to it. And because obviously I think we've all witnessed it throughout this past 1.5 years or so. What I'd like to see is a bit of a balance where, you know, digital documentation is recognized, accepted, and there is more trust between different jurisdictions who utilize those systems. Malta, for example, is venturing on this massive digitization of the register to a new level. And the issues we're facing aren't, you know, the technological issues per se, but they're the issues concerning the recognition of this way of doing things. Certainly, I share Klaus's thoughts. I share Klaus's views on, you know, certain things like inspections and up to a certain extent closings. But my experience has been extremely positive when it comes to even sales and purchases with a digital platform. I mean, as long as there is trust between the lawyers, between the parties, it can work. But obviously, the trust is also built because you've physically met that person at one stage in your life. So I think there has to be the balance between having that human interaction and utilizing the digital platform going forward in the best possible manner. I don't think they can live independently of each other. That's my opinion on my take on that.
So just one thing on that, Matthew. I mean, I think it's interesting with digitalization, and certainly I was speaking to a lawyer outside of the shipping industry a couple of days ago, and he said life has been made a lot easier because of the DocuSign and all that side of it. So then when you do big transactions, you don't have to wade through, you know, it's just quickly done, and you can go out for a meal and wait for it all to be approved. But digitalization saves money, it drives in efficiency, but, you know, it's about sales, it's about driving in revenue, you know, and you've got Klaus and we've got Rona here who represent the Marshall Islands, as well as Matthew for Malta. You know, what are the flags doing when they're in lockdown to actually drive in business? Because when you're at the North Shippings and Posidonias and you're pressing the flesh, and that's the important element. I mean, what are your quick thoughts on that, Matthew, before I bring in Rona on this?
No, obviously, I think we're all suffering. I think all the participants here are suffering the repercussions of not being out there about, you know, making people aware of our own particular jurisdiction. That's obviously, for Malta being an island, it's that much harder. So yes, as I said, and this is where I agree with Klaus here, and I'm sure Enrico and Rona also share this opinion. The physical interaction to sell, you know, the services we provide and to sell the jurisdictions we represent are not going to be done through this digital platform forever. There has to be a time where we have to physically meet. But as I said before, I think the balance, striking a balance, ultimately can be achievable. I mean, pre-COVID, I never dreamt of using this video conferencing, although I was aware of it. Now, for now at least, I can't seem to live without it.
Rona, let me bring it, and then we got some questions coming in. There's a couple of good questions that I want to push out to the panel. But Rona, give me your thoughts, and certainly on this issue of force majeure as well, because I know, you know, this is something that is a situation facing shipyards in Turkey as much as anything else. But can you give me your thoughts?
Okay. On the force majeure, as you know, once this COVID has started effect on our lives, everybody started to check the contracts, shipbuilding contracts, whether the force majeure clause has a pandemic, is covering the pandemic issues. So once the World Health Organization issue, this is a pandemic, so everybody check whether the contract in the first stage was a pandemic clause for force majeure, and second, everybody started to check what are the requirements for this pandemic to be accepted as a permissible delays in the contract, where the builder get an extension without paying any penalties or damages to the customers and the buyers. Actually, the effects of COVID-19, it's very difficult to calculate on the delay times and also for the force majeure times, because it's not only the effects of the people who get caught or who get affected by the COVID-19, but also the preventions, the measures to stop the spread of COVID-19 also affected the delivery times of the shipyards. So it's not just the disease itself, but also the measurements have affected the construction process. And whether it is accepted as a force majeure is totally difficult to state, because the effects are, and also the effects on the delay time is very difficult to calculate. The shifts, even for the lunch times, they have started to change, and also the workman power is also affected due to the they cannot stand each other within 2 meters length between the difference. So how much the vessels are affected, not only because of the COVID directly, but also indirectly due to the measures taken into consideration. As Klaus said, now it is now you can foresee the effects now, and you are supposed to take precautions to minimize the effects. But we have COVID-19, but we might have a COVID-22 next year, and also the situation may change, may vary, and the vaccination will not be sufficient, and the governments may raise new measures, new lockdowns, which maybe COVID-19 is not a force majeure anymore, but it may be a force majeure next year within the changes in the new variations of COVID-19.
But I think that point there, Rona, you're exactly right, and we don't know what's around the corner. Is how does shipping prepare for game changers? And COVID-19 was a game changer. It didn't see happening. And what lessons have been learned. I'm going to come on to some questions here. I'm going to quickly just go on to the one from an anonymous attendee, and then go on to Ian Stokes's question here. But I'll go on to the anonymous one first. Will COVID lead to an uptick in the number of shipping disputes? And if so, what type of will these be, and how will they be settled? In the courts or by arbitration or mediation? Who would like to answer that?
Yes, I'm pleased to answer. Of course, each case turns on its own fact. So we cannot just draw a general line and say the arbitration will answer this or that way. And there is, of course, also a very big difference between common law and civil law jurisdiction. Whilst you know that in common law, force majeure must be inserted into a contract. Otherwise, there will be no general recourse to force majeure, except if the situation tantamount to frustration. Whilst the common law jurisdiction, civil law jurisdiction, and I want, of course, to speak for the other colleagues, but generally in Italy, and it goes that way, a force majeure is a general concept. So you can apply for force majeure even to terminate a contract, or also to seek for delay, or to seek for more time in order to perform your obligation. And this is a very important issue in terms of shipbuilding contract or ship repairs contract.
But Enrico, do you think you'll see an uptake? Do you think you'll see more disputes like this because of COVID?
There are a lot of disputes pending, either on arbitration and in courts. I think that we will see them and their results and their outcomes in the near future, because at the very beginning, the approach has been for a lot of commercial people to try to defer the problem, to give extensions, to keep things going. But now, sooner or later, we should come to the core of the matter, and there will be, of course, disputes on the force majeure. One of the topics I would address as a potential development of this pandemic disease is, of course, dispute in terms of force majeure, but also because now the real risk is not the pandemic in itself, because everyone was aware that COVID is around, but rather are the measures and pieces of legislation which will be issued by different state countries. And on that, really, you never know. I'm not in a position to predict, even for Italy, what will go on.
Yeah. Coming on to Ian's question here. I'm going to read it out. He said, I feel the question is being avoided here because without seafarers to operate the world's merchant fleet, there'd be no trade. And as I'd mentioned, we'd all freeze or starve. Are the panelists concerned that the long-term impact of the pandemic on seafarers' well-being, welfare, and mental health will reduce the availability of crews going forward? And I think that's a key element there. And he could even bring in the supplementary question: is it down to the flag states to actually ensure that owners or even the P&I clubs, promote mental health as being something of crucial importance? But I'll come on to you in a second, Enrico, because I know you want to answer that. But Matthew or Klaus, let me get your views on this, because we haven't heard from you for a wee while. This whole issue of the seafarer itself. What's your position on it?
I mean, that's a very interesting question, and we all know that the seafarers have suffered a lot from the lockdown measures in the ports, in terms of not being able to go home, having to stay on board much longer than they anticipated. But I would actually doubt whether these difficulties lead to a shortage of seafarers, in terms that there are not enough people who want to become seafarers, because the job as a seafarer is genuinely not very attractive. I mean, that is something, that is why we are all sitting behind our desks and not on board of ships. Being a seafarer, being an able seaman, let's take the lower ranks, is something for smaller economies, for poorer countries. So people going to sea are from poorer countries, and as soon as the wealth in their home country increases, they want to stay at home anyway, irrespective of COVID or not. So I don't think that we will have a shortage, but we may probably see further nationalities coming on board, which we haven't seen before. That may be an impact, but I don't think that we get a shortage.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Matthew, then Enrico on this. I mean, this whole issue, when the International Chamber of Shipping announced, I think during London International Shipping Week, that they believe there'll be a cruise shortage in 2026. And I think there's a piece in Tradewinds this week talking about this massive resignation by seafarers who feel they haven't been treated well during the pandemic. Matthew, what's your view? And it does go back to this point about the short, medium, and long-term implications, and whether shipping is agile enough to deal with this.
Look, I think COVID has brought with it, not only for shipping, brought with it a reality in our daily lives as well. There is, from articles I read, also reluctance of people going back to the office after having experienced working from home. So obviously, what's being done in the regular physical on-land work is being reflected at sea, possibly. Having said that, I think I would agree with Klaus on this, because it's really, it boils down on demand and supply. Remember, even the truckers around Europe are facing a shortage. And all of a sudden, you're not seeing the typical German, Italian, French trucker. All of a sudden, there is a surge in Filipinos taking on the post. And it's being done simply because of economic necessity. I believe the same will be done with shipping. And the reality is, it's ultimately always going to be demand and supply. If shippers are going to be faced with a shortage in the next 5 years, then the solution is rather simple. Up wages and you get, a nationality taking on the role. So on that front, I'm not too concerned. Even when you consider that living on board vessels nowadays, especially these larger VLCCs, although very hard, and I don't think any of us would take it on, is still a different world to how it was 20, 30 years ago. The conventions such as the MLC, and as we said before, the strict uptake to ensure standards are not being breached are paying dividends as well. And conditions, although still very difficult, have improved tremendously.
But I'm just bringing in something that Klaus said there. I mean, he actually, to quote him, the job is not very attractive. And, we're moving into the digital age where the seafarer is going to be a different type of person. In 10 years' time, you might have 4 or 5 people on board ship, and the ship is being run by seafarers ashore who are highly trained in whatever. So, we do need to attract the right people in. And is shipping doing that? I mean, that to me is the major issue moving forward.
I think we all recognize that taking on a seafarer's career is not easy to start with. Is shipping managing to attract? I don't know. I don't think so, really and truly, if I had to be honest about it. The same with truckers, the same with certain trades which are falling out of favor. But I always believe that at the end of the day, we're going to be faced with a demand and supply, as I said before. I mean, part of the reason why we're seeing the explosion in costs of materials is simply because the supply chain has been disrupted. So now, if you want your nice gadget, you have to pay 20% more for it. Now, that's, the effect of the disruption in the supply chain. I think, if we're going to be faced with a shortage, you're going to have competing container ships having to pay more to attract crew members on board. And I believe that there's always going to be, a particular uptake once the price is right. Ultimately, the consumer will have to pay for that, but that's a fact of life. That's the market for you.
It is. If we compare the job of a seafarer to, for example, the job of a musician, so something completely different, we would actually all agree, I guess, that a musician wants to become a musician out of passion for the job, because he wants to be a musician. He doesn't do it for economic necessity. But my point is, a seafarer will, the majority of seafarers will probably do the job out of economic necessity and not very much out of passion for seafaring. That was my whole point, and I think that having said that, I agree that if there are less seafarers and more demand, the wages will go up. Absolutely, and we have seen that for example, for masters and officers already a couple of years ago, where you could really see that they made so much money all of a sudden, and the fluctuation was immense, because they just looked around and there were other ship owners paying double. So we have seen that already, and I think that will definitely happen. Yes, but it's the job of a seafarer has nothing to do with passion or with the desire to do something meaningful in your life or something. It's just about making money and with all these Filipinos paying for the family at home.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point there, and I think we saw it in 2008, didn't we, with the poaching of staff and what have you, with Filipino LNG captains earning 6 times the salary of their national president, and then deciding, well, I'm going to stay at sea for 4 years rather than 10, and therefore they're exacerbating that whole issue. I'm going to come on. We have a question here, and probably the last question really, because we are running over time. But it appears that the IMO flag states, this is from Jay, haven't been able to influence the health and immigration departments. And this is a key element here, to treat seafarers as key workers. We're going to see attrition of experienced seafarers. There's all talk about treating seafarers as key workers. However, the authorities haven't been able to enforce it. The charters seem to talk the seafarers are key workers, but their declarations, etc. But they prefer not to have crew change. But I think the point is that there's other elements within governments that aren't being told what they need to do. Who wants to have a view on that?
Yeah, how to say, the crew is not my my profession, let's say. But the thing is that it has to be noted that the crews are the most affected people on board the vessel from COVID-19 life, because they were unable to, as Klaus said, and Matthew stated, and Enrico raised it, they didn't unable to go to home. They are unable to see their families. Although there might be no shortage of crew in the future, as stated, the increase of the rates, wages, there will be always crew, but we have to face it. They had a real tough time for the last 2 years, and they have to be treated in a way that everybody understand their position and understand their problems, where they are unable to see their children and they don't go to their children's graduation ceremonies. So I think everybody has to step a little bit forward and see the problems of the crew and understand their position in a way. In the difficult times before the container, also the bulk carrier charter rates are increased, everybody has a bad time. But nowadays it's the good times for the owners, so I think they should appreciate the situation of the crew. And also the flex states needs to be more flexible on the crew's life, let's say, and be more to find solutions on their problems. Even for the seaman books, you know, to get a seaman book or renew it, they need to go on to the shore and take some time, which has to be, as stated, can be shortened by the digitalization, by new ways of life, which can be shortened. And I think all flex states have to improve their approach to the crew.
Okay, thank you, Rowan. Thank you. I think really we've come to the end of the debate. We're about 15 minutes over now, but first of all, thank you to the delegates for your questions today and your participation. Thank you to Ganado for your help and support in getting the webinar, and to the panelists. I really enjoyed talking to you, and actually rather enjoyed the preliminary conversations we had as well. I think we'd all do well to go out and have a nice lunch. I think we'd have a great time, certainly carrying on this conversation. But it's been great talking to you. It's been great welcoming you here to the webinar. We tried to be as objective as we can in these webinars, and I think today was an example of that. So thank you very much indeed. Just to remind everybody, today's debate will be on the SMI website in the next few days or so, and readers will also be sent it digitally as well. So any of your colleagues who are unable to see it can see it, and I'll also be sending through a link to all of the participants as well, so you can see that as well. But if I can just say thank you very much indeed for your time today. It's an hour of your time, and I do appreciate it. And keep safe, and we'll no doubt speak soon again. And thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.